So we left off actually in the middle of Sif Bet. I want to quickly remind ourselves of Sif Bet a little bit and look in the tour. So turn to the tour. I just want to set up. Our goal is to look right now at Paz Vav, part of it. But first I want to set up that by reading the tour a little bit. Just a little bit in where it says Katav HaRambam, a little bit towards the beginning of Sif Bet or in the middle of Sif Bet. If you have Sifim in your tour, it says Katav HaRambam. There are 2 points that the tour is going to have issue with the Rambam. 2 points. One a very small point and one a little bit bigger point. So let's just look at this thing where it says Katav HaRambam. I'll read just the tour here. Katav HaRambam aval im li'er mitchila va'ad sof. We're talking about the drop of milk that falls on a piece of meat in the pot, and the piece is separate from the pot to some extent. There was a machloket about that, but the point is it's separate in some way, and therefore you got to mix it in. So he says, im in the air, if you do stir it, mitchila va'ad sof, from the beginning to the end, o kiseh mishas nefila, or you cover it from the time the drop falls, va'ad sof, until the end, harezeh benoten tam. Then you just have to have noten tam in the whole pot to make it. In other words, as long as it doesn't give flavor to the whole pot, it'll be mutter. Venira, says the tour, Venira she'ein tzarich rach she'yinaer o kisei miyad b'shas nefila. And it seems like the Rambam is not being medayek. He's like quoting in the Gemara, but really what he means is, so this is the first issue with the Rambam. Really what he means is you just have to cover it or stir it in the beginning. You don't have to cover it and stir it to the end. He doesn't understand why the Rambam is saying you have to cover it to the end. If you mix it in the beginning, that's enough. You mix it in the beginning, it's mixed up. What do you have to keep standing there? Ad sof. Doesn't really, he says, the Rambam must be lav davka. Va'afilu psach acharkach, and in the Rambam when he goes on, he says, again, va'afilu psach acharkach milinaer miyad mitarev hatam. He says later, when you stir it right away, it's mitarev hatam. B'kol mashi b'kedera u'mitzarev kulo levatlo. He only refers to the fact that you stir it from the beginning. He doesn't mention and at the end. He says the stirring at the beginning causes it to mix, and that's it. So that seems to be what the Rambam means. So that's the first issue, which is not much of an issue, but it's a question why the Rambam said ad sof. Maybe just quoting the Gemara. And then he says, V'katav od harambam, and this is a bigger question. V'katav od harambam, nafal chalav letoch hamarak, o letoch hatichot, v'lo noda le'eze haticha. It fell into the broth or into the pieces, but you don't know which piece. Le'eze haticha nafal. No er et hakadera, then you should stir the pot, kulo, the whole pot. Ad shitarev hakol, until it all mixes together. And now, if you can taste the milk in it, it's asur. And if it's not, and if you don't taste the milk, then the whole pot is muter. So, says the tour. I don't understand what he's saying. Because if it's in the rotev, matzarich linaer. Why do you need to stir it? It's already in the rotev. It's already mixed together. V'im ein over rotev, and if it's not in the rotev, it's above. Ma mo'il ni'er shemina er charkach.
Now, and when you say ein over rotev, it's above. Could you just give another line on that, please?
V'im ein over rotev. If it's somehow separate, the piece is separate from
the
rest.
where.
Well, I'm not getting into that question, whether it's partially submerged, like Rashi says, or like the re that it's fully out. Either way, it's somehow separate.
But he said in this particular case, you don't know which piece the milk fell on. So you can't determine which, if it's out, if it's in. You don't know which piece it fell on. That's the case right now. That's the second case he gave.
Yeah, but he
Guys,
says,
sorry to
but he
interrupt.
says
Where are we up
Mimanashach.
to?
He says Mimanashach. If it's in the thing, it's either one of the two possibilities. Either it's in the thing, it's in the broth, and then it doesn't help at all. Or you don't know which one it fell on, but maybe it was in the broth, so then you don't need to do anything. And if it was out of the broth, then you're not allowed to do it. It doesn't help. So why are you doing anything?
Sorry, Rav Nachum, where are we up to? Sorry, I joined it a
I'm
little
sorry,
late.
we're into tour, the very end of Sif Bet into tour.
Perfect, thank you.
You hear what I'm saying, Asher? You're asking an excellent question. You maybe understand it better by your question. But yeah, your question is
No,
right.
because I thought this whole thing is a whole separate thing where he's grouping two cases together. Either it fell into the broth or it fell into the piece. You don't know where it fell.
No, it fell on
Right?
pieces.
That's as opposed to the first case that he first answered in the first
True,
Ketavot Rambam.
but still we have
Rambam is giving a second case.
right. It's
with
true, but
two seeking to it.
the Torah says this Maman of Shach argument, which is saying let's analyze this doubt. Either it's A or it's B, and he's going to say that in both cases, A and B, this stirring doesn't help. So why is he stirring? He's saying if it's case A, which means let's say it's outside, it fell on a piece that was outside, then stirring it is not going to be helpful because the piece already ruined that whole piece. You're going to need to have 60 against the whole piece. So why are you going to stirring is not going to help. And if it fell on a piece that's in the broth, then stirring is not necessary. But either way, the whole thing should be usher because you don't know which piece it fell on, and maybe that piece is the usher, and now with the whole, and you need 60 against the largest piece. Theoretically, that's what the din should be. You need 60 against the largest piece that it could possibly have fallen on. Right, the largest piece that's outside of the broth.
Well,
You would need 60
the
against
60 is the 60 is the fallback. One of the things we learned in Torah vote is
All right,
that
Tom, I use 60
shishim is the fallback. The time is what matters. You use shishim
Whenever
when
I
you can't
when I
determine
said
time.
60, yes, when I said 60, I just meant Tom.
So
It's
maybe
just a
that's
shorthand way of saying
that's
time.
the reason to mix it in, to determine if there's time. That's exactly the reason. You're determining if there's time. If there's no time, then you're fine. If there is time, then the whole thing's a sur, but it would have been a sur anyway.
So what you're saying is actually what we're going to see said. That is an answer. That is an answer. But you're giving me the answer before I'm explaining the question. But yes, that is an answer that you have. That is exactly kind of what the Taz says. But before we get there, I want to make
today like you had asked. So
what?
And I didn't have time to read the Taz today because it was a crazy day. So
right. Well, anyway, that was the Taz that I guess I asked you to read. But actually, Joel's going to go through it with it. But the main thing is before you understand the answer, understand the question. The question is, what mamo'il? What does it help, this stirring? Because either it's outside the broth or it's inside the broth. And if it's outside the broth, it doesn't help. And if it's inside the broth, you don't need it. So he doesn't understand. And you could ask also another question, which is, why is this case substantially different? I understand that that's unknown which one it fell on, but why is it different from the previous case where we already said that if you stir it, it goes together? Now he's saying again, if you just stir it. Before he also said, if you stir it, then it's okay. And here he's saying again, stir it and it's okay. So why is he giving me twice this din? Just say always stir it. All right, so that's the question. Basically, the Tur does not understand the Rambam. So it's important to understand why he doesn't understand the Rambam. We can give answers. And that's actually what the Beit Yosef does, but I think the Taz gives the best answer. So let's go to the Taz. And this I asked Joel to prepare for us. Joel, you want to read that?
I have a choice. This is great.
Hey, give us time.
You don't have to read it. I'll read it if you don't want.
No, I'll read it. I'll read it. But
or I'll ask Asher to read
it. So
remind us which Taz, please.
The Taz Vav. It's sort of smack in the middle, not the beginning of it. I don't want the whole Taz Vav because.
Oh, you want to start? Okay. It's worth saying what this is on, right? This is the Ramah, not the Shulchan Aruch, not the Mechaber. If you just stir it at the beginning or you just cover it immediately, right? He says, "Afal gav deloni erv lechasav lebasof kol deira mitzaref." All right.
In other words, wait, let me just say one thing. This
Yeah.
is relating to the first small difficulty that the Tur had with the Rambam. That why does the Rambam say from the beginning to the end? And so the Ramah said just the beginning is enough.
Which is the Tur also, right? The Tur also says that.
Right.
So,
The Tur also says that.
yeah, not the Rambam, who seems to be following a line of the Gemara, which will be.
But now we're going to try to explain. Maybe the Rambam meant it seriously. Maybe he seriously meant to stir it out to the sof. And that's what the Taz is going to start with at Aval be'emet yesh.
Actually, yeah, let's see if I remember.
I have it in dark. By me, it's dark. It's after it's after a colon.
Let's see if I can find that. I just assumed you wanted me to start from the beginning.
Oh, no, I didn't.
But that's fine. But now I have to find it.
Well, probably everybody has to find it.
Yeah.
Oh, Noam, welcome. Mazal tov to Noam. He had a boy.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Mazal tov.
Mazal tov.
Mazel tov.
Siman tov, Mazel tov,
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov, and Siman tov.
You're-
So when's the bris?
Shabbos.
Shabbos.
All right.
Shabbos.
And now you have a
Okay,
Dvar Torah.
good.
You can give me the
Let's
Dvar Torah
go.
about why we do it on Shabbos.
Exactly.
Okay, really, Mazal tov, Mazal tov. Such good news.
Thank you. If I have to get off, it's because we're still in the hospital. So excuse me if that happens.
Okay.
Do you have a hint as to where this is? Oh, here you go. Aval be'emet yesh l'taretz, divrei Gemara.
Exactly.
All
She
right.
found it. Did anybody else find it?
How far into this
It's
talk
about
is it?
a third of the way in, I would say.
But it's hard to say. Mine is on like 3 pages, so it's all right.
You can
Aval.
search if you have it visual. If you have
Yeah.
a non-book, you can search for Aval be'emet.
Aval be'emet yesh l'taretz divrei haGemara v'harambam be'ofen shelo yeh machloket ben Rambam l'Tur l'dina ela beferush halashon. So he's going to try and reconcile the two of them. He's going to say it's really just it's a language question, not a deen question. She'atur mefaresh ma shekatav mitchila ve'ad sof haynu shelo pasak milenaer ad shesilko min ha'esh. All right. So what is it? How does the Torah understand mitchila ve'ad sof? That means you keep stirring as long as the thing is is on the fire. Okay. Umishum hachi cholek al Rambam. Right, l'sfis v'rato. Right? That's why he's cholek on the Rambam, right? Why? Because aval harambam mefaresh b'inyan acher dechol zman sheyesh mamashut shel tipat chalav al basar lo mahani mashini erak dera. Right, v'shem chazar achar kach oto chelek lamala v'chozer v'oser ota chaticha b'fnei atzma. Oh, sorry. That's my. There you go. Okay. ואחר כך חלק למעלה וחוזר ואוסר אותה חתיכה בפני עצמה, כיוון שישנה עדיין בעין עליו. על כן אמרינן שנער עד זמן שיכלה ממשות של הטיפה, והיינו מתחילה ועד סוף, שאמרו בגמרא.
So that's his explanation. You can just translate the last 10 words he said there.
Yes, so I'll even say it outside. The Rambam says, what's mitchila ad sof? Until you get rid of the mamashut of the drop of milk, that's mitchila ad sof.
Right. The soap is not the soap of the boiling. The soap is the soap of the mixing. Of course, that doesn't fit at all to the Gemara, because what does it mean? He just stirred it at the end. What would that mean? He just stirred it at the end. You know, what would it mean? He just stirred. What would that possibly mean? But he says, Tchila ad sof in other words, stir it from the beginning of the stirring till the end of the achieving of the desired result of stirring, which is that the milk is disappeared.
Yeah, it could. I mean, I think you could read the Gemara there, then saying, right, if you didn't stir it at all, and the stuff kind of sat there for a bit, and then you stir it, right, then it could have infected a whole bunch of other things first without properly bringing all the forces to bear.
Right, you could say that it's like from the beginning of its disappearing.
Yeah.
Until the end of its disappearing. Because if it starts disappearing on its own, then it's disappearing straight into the chaticha.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah,
that
Right.
case, that could explain the Gemara saying you only stir at the end. It's already started disappearing on its own, and you stir it to help it finish it.
That maybe won't help.
yeah.
Right, but that
Okay,
won't
very
help
nice,
because then, right,
very nice.
exactly, yeah.
Very nice. So fine. So we can explain the Gemara. Thank you. So we've saved the Taz a little bit. But the point is, he's giving another explanation. Tchila Adsof is a totally different meaning. It means stir it until it all disappears. And the Rambam is saying it dafka in the halacha. You have to don't stop stirring until it's really mixed.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
think
he
he says
means.
in the next, he says, right, De'al sof haviyot hatipa amru v'chenu kavanat Rambam.
Right.
Yeah. Aval. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Im kaltama mashuda tipa moder Rambam latur desagi im posek. I got on the next page. Kevan she'akol mitzaref l'shishim vashta ein kan mevatlin yisur.
No. Wait. You skipped.
Yeah, up there. Yeah. So
You skipped.
I did. Oh.
Aval im
I did. I turned the page and it wasn't turning the page. The next column. The sagi im posek achar kach lenaer kanis kenir elinachon. So, okay, keep going.
Yeah. So that's the first teretz of the first part of the Rambam. Now he's going to talk about the second issue with the Rambam, which was, let's remind ourselves, the second issue was what does it help when it's filled on like unknown parts? Then he tells you go ahead and stir it. Why is that going to help?
But okay. ומה שכתב הטור אחר כך, ואיני מבין את דבריו וכולי. לפי הבנת הטור בדברי הרמב"ם, דמיירא שאחר ששהה קצת ניער את הקדרה, לכן הקשה מה מועיל ניעור וכולי. So he says, once you've waited a little bit, what difference does it make?
In other words, he understands. He's basically, this is an important point. He understands that the difference between the first and second halacha in the Rambam is that the first halacha is that you have to do it right away. But if it fell into parts unknown, then you can even wait. Then you can even have a shehiyah. You can have a delay, and then the stirring you can also do it. And that's the reason why the Rambam gives two different halachot. One is stir it right away, and one is stir it with a delay. And that you're only allowed to do the delay where it fell into an unknown piece. In other words, you come to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, "Oh, it fell into an unknown piece, so stir it." It's a din that you're getting from the Rav, so therefore it's obviously later, and that's the chiddush that he's telling you, that obviously you can stir it in the beginning, but here where it fell in unknown parts, you can also stir it later. And he says that's the Havana of the tour, but he's going to reject that. Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Well, it's yeah. Shechar Shak no, I'm beyond that. Yeah. L'chenik sham mamoil nior v'chulei. Aval Beit Yosef u'mahari nun Habib pirshu divrei harambam demayir shalosh haklal. All right, so we got the other side of things, right? That the Rambam is not dealing with any shehiyah here. Ve'in lomar minale be'emet le'atur lefi divrei harambam demayir shaha ketzatu.
No, I think it's ilema.
You're right, there's a yesh lomar. Yeah, there's a yesh lomar. Yeah. So that's right, ilema. So if you want to say, right, so how did the Torah get the fact that the Rambam is dealing with a waiting period here, right? Ulak shot kushiato. Yesh lomar deochiach ken midichtav noer et hakdera kedei shitarev lashon atid v'lo amar im ni'er k'mo shekatav bereisha.
In other words, he says, go ahead and do it. Implication, you're doing it now after you came to the rabbi.
Which, by the way, I want to save that explanation just a little bit. It makes a little bit of sense because you didn't know, like you clearly weren't watching the pot at the moment that the drop fell.
That's a good point. Now, you can't do it right away. You can't do it right away because if you did it right away, then you must have seen it happen. Right. So, good point.
All right. And then where was I? Elavadai. Dechan mere shemrin lokach imbal lishol kenir eli kavanata tour. All right, but so we're dealing with the question that what do you instruct somebody if they come and ask about it? All right, aval nirel leoniatati lefioniatati shedivrei Rambam einam mitparshim klal b'derech zeh. Right, this is not how to understand the Rambam. Uvetchila nedakdek od bidvarav ha ein mevatlim isur lecharchila umari nun chabib savar letaken zeh velo tiken הדהה אף אם לא שהה וניער מיד, מכל מקום הלשון של הרמב"ם מורה שלכתחילה יעשה כן.
In other words, you're not answering the question. One fundamental question is, how come you could go to the rabbi and the rabbi says, stir it? If it was usher before, and now it's mutter, you're mevatli an isser l'chatchila. You're intentionally mevatli an isser. We can't allow that. And the Mari Nun Chaviv, Nun, by the way, means ibn.
Yeah, Ben,
So it's,
yeah.
So it's the Mari ibn Chaviv. So everybody's called Mari Nun Chaviv, but he doesn't solve that problem in his attempt to solve that problem, because you still are doing it before, after the fact. I mean, even if you do it right away, even if you do it right away, you're still doing an act to mevatel something. That's what he's saying. Even if you're doing it immediately, you're still doing it intentionally. So how can you do that?
ואף יכניס החתיכה שיש עליה חלב לתוך הרוטב, ויבטל החלב לכתחילה. אלא הדבר ברור דכאן מיירי הרמב"ם לעניין שבאמת מצטרף הכל, דהיינו שנפל לתוך המרק, וכן אם נפל על החתיכה שמונחת חוץ לרוטב, אלא שלא נודע איזה היא. ועל כן לא אמרינן חתיכה עצמה נעשה נבלה, כמו שכתב הרב המגיד.
So wait a second. This is the major chiddush that he's saying.
Yeah.
This is the major chiddush that I wanted to get to, which is a general rule that you should understand, which you should remember, which is that we don't say Hanan when there's a suffix of what happened. But that's what he's saying. Since there's a suffix here, we don't say Chaticha Atzma Naseh Nevela. So that's why we can always go against the original drop, because there's only when we know it fell on. He's actually saying it's a suffix. I think he's saying we don't know whether it fell in the broth or on one of the pieces. So in other words, it might have fallen in the broth, in which case there's no Hanan. If it fell on one of the pieces, there would be Hanan. But we only have a suffix of whether it may have fallen on a piece or may have fallen. In other words, we understood the suffix was we don't know which piece it fell on. I think what he's saying is, now the suffix is we don't even know if it fell on a piece at all. It's kind of like what Asher was saying. It may have fallen in the broth, and it may have fallen on a piece, and we only would say Hanan on a piece if we know for sure it fell on a piece, but maybe it didn't.
Yeah, but the way you're explaining it, are you making it into a spec-speka, Nachum? We don't know if it fell on a piece, then we don't know which piece it fell on.
It's not a suffix speka. It's a simple suffix. It may have fallen on a piece, and it may have fallen in the broth. That's all. We know it fell. We don't have a suffix of whether it fell or not. We know that a drop fell. We saw the drop falling, high above the pot, and it fell in. And then we ran over, and we had no idea where it fell. We don't know if it fell on the piece or in the broth. So it's a suffix. So it's a vadai that it fell. It's just a suffix where it fell. And on such a case, we're not going to say Hanan on a piece. Like I say, we're not going to say one of the pieces is for sure usher, because it's not true. Maybe it's not.
So continue to explain, and a simple suffix works. Why?
No, it's not a simple suffix works. Not a simple suffix makes a heter. A simple suffix says when we don't say Hanan. So
that's the major point. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's the major point. We don't say Hanan when there's a suffix of whether Hanan happened at all, whether the piece happened at all. Maybe it fell in the broth. And that's a great. And first of all, that explains the Rambam very nicely, and it's also an important halacha.
Yeah, is that halacha chiddush of the Magid Mishnah, or does it come before? I didn't look.
I think he's selling. I mean, I didn't check, but if the Magid Mishnah is saying it, you're saying maybe the Magid Mishnah is quoting someone.
Yeah.
I doubt it. It seems to me like it's a svara that he's bringing. I didn't read the Magid Mishnah, but I would suspect that it's his chiddush. Okay. Or it's not his chiddush, it's his understanding. He doesn't think it's a chiddush. Yeah. He thinks that's obvious.
So, all right. כמו שכתב הרב מגיד, וזה לשונו, שכיוון שאינו יודע איזו חתיכה היא, אין לומר בה נעשה נבלה, ואי אפשר לאסור הכל, שהרי אין בחלה ונותן טעם, עד כאן לשונו. So you can't say one of the pieces is nevela because you don't know which piece it is, and you can't say that it's all asur because it's like a small drop of chalav in a big pot of stuff. So okay. Uva Rambam kan lomar be'ezin yan ba'lanu al
Wait
yedei
a second. So now we have another question before we go on. Now we have another question, which is, so why bother stirring it? There's no chanan, it dropped, fell, and we're done. Why bother stirring it? So now he's got to explain that. So that's Ba Rambam.
Uva Rambam kan lomar be'ezin yan ba'lanu al yedei starfut shar hatichot אם יש עובד כוכבים כפלה שיוכל לטום, אם יש בה טעם חלב, ואם לא יטום טעם חלב, מותר, אף על פי דאין שם 60, כמו שכתב בית יוסף בשם הרמב"ם בסימן צ"ח, ועל כן אמר כאן, אם יש שם עובד כוכבים לטום, אז ינער את הכל כדי שיתערב, ואחר כך ייתן לו לטום. אם ייתן לו תקף לטום, אז ודאי יטום טעם חלב ממה שצף למעלה. Right? So if I give it, why do I have to stir it? If I give it to him, if I take it right from the place where the milk dropped, potentially, then it's going to taste like milk, even though the whole thing isn't milky.
Right.
So
In other words, we're doing a scientific experiment. In order for the experiment to work properly, for the tima of the goy to work, then you have to mix it to see that it gets everywhere. Because he goes to the opposite. He doesn't say this, but he can also say the opposite. Maybe he'll taste it and tell you there's no chalav taste there, but that's only because he tasted it in a faraway spot. You have to mix it so that he'll taste a valid, a sampling. The sampling has to be a valid sampling.
This might be, right, if you think about it, whenever you give somebody, like, forget having a non-Jew taste something and see if there's something asur in it. Whenever you're, making something and you want someone to taste it, you're going to mix it really well. And you might actually have a havamina here that, well, I can't mix this really well because I know a tipat chalav fell in it. And
you are just mentioning something I want to show everybody, and the Rabbi Akiva Eger says like that.
Oh, he does? Right.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a creative point. Who says you can stir it? Says Rabbi Akiva Eger.
So,
he says, who says you can stir it? You're doing bishul of maybe there is enough milk there. Maybe the milk is 1 in 50. And now you're stirring milk and meat together. That's an isser.
Good. I look forward to seeing that. So it's okay. I take up the tom. Where was I? Asaf lamal ve'emet im yar venu v'yitem lo litom lo yitom tam chalav ki hachalav mitbatel b'tarovet. Right. V'anan lo mitarfinan ela im yitom ha'oved kochavim tam chalav achar shehu me'urav hetev.
By the way, notice he uses the word mitarfinan to refer
beautiful
to
word. Yeah.
Well, mitarfinan he uses to mean, because a lot of times people say it's not treif, it's just not kosher. Treif is a treif animal. Treif.
Yeah.
Here he's using the word treif like colloquially, like we would colloquially.
However, we treif we declare treif, I guess.
Right. Mitarfinan. We won't pronounce it being non-kosher unless the guy tastes it, right?
Bechinam im lo yarev. So you could have lost this for nothing if you don't mix it together. So
right.
Ve'alken amar no'er kedei shitarev hakol im yesh b'kedei rak kula tam chalav. Perush lo b'mashet saf lamala lechud az davka trefa v'chein b'chaticha shelo noda ezehi. והדין הוא שגם שאר חתיכות מצטרפות עימה, ואם ייתן ליטום חתיכה אחת, אפשר שיטום אותה חתיכה שנפלה עליה ויטום טעם חלב, ומכוח זה יאסור הכל. All right, so similar thing, right? If you give him a piece, it fell on a piece, give him the piece, he'll end up tasting the milky piece maybe accidentally, and everything will be asur even though it didn't have to be. ובאמת, אם יתערב יתבטל טעם החלב ההוא, על כן ינער הכל. So that's the reason you have to stir all of it.
Right. Okay. And then he just goes on and says, and then the Rambam says that if there's no goy there, then you need 60. And maybe in such a case, you don't need to stir it then, because you're just relying on 60. The whole purpose of stirring is just so the goy will taste. But if you're relying on 60, then why stir it?
Should I keep going with it or?
No. Okay. Yeah, you don't need to stir it. I'm just summarizing what he says. Right. So actually, that's what the Rambam means, and I think that's the best answer. I mean, there's other answers that the Beit Yosef brings, but I think this is the best answer. And also the Chach talks about it. Everybody talks about this question. I think this is the best answer. which is that like because Asher said it basically that we don't know where it fell, and in such a case we don't say Hanan. Okay, so let's go back. Let's continue in the Shulchan Aruch from here, and that important point. Remember that important point. A second, where should we continue from? Let's start from the Ramah in Bet still. We'll just read it quickly. Josh, you want to read it? Just in the middle of Sif Bet, we already read, we talked about the drop and falling on the meat, and now the Ramah adds, I think we read a little bit of this last week, but let's just get a running start to this Siman. It says, Hagav v'ken im.
וכן אם לא ניער כלל? זה the one?
Yes, exactly.
וכן אם לא ניער כלל, לא בתחילה ולא בסוף, ולא כיסה כלל, אם יש 60 בקטרה נגד טיפת חלב שנפל, אינו אסור, רק החתיכה לבד, ושאר הקטרה מותר.
Right, so if he didn't do anything, then it's not going to mix, and just the piece will be usher. Go on.
וכן, אם ניער בתחילה או כיסה מיד, אף על גב דלא ניער ולא כיסה, לבסוף, כל הקטרה מצטרף.
So here he says you don't need to do the ending part. You don't need to do the ending stirring, because he understands this ending stirring the way the Torah understood it, not the way the Taz understood it. You don't need to do the ending stirring. It's just enough to do it miyad.
והוא שניער בכיסה, second?
Yeah.
מיד, שנפל שם האיסור. So it's only if you started stirring immediately when the drop fell.
Right. All right, we can and continue.
back to מחבר, וכן אם נפל לתוך המרק, או לחתיכות, ולא נודע לאיזו חתיכה נפל, נוער את הקטרה כולה, עד שישוב ויתערב הכל. אם יש בקטרה כולה טעם חלב, אסורה, ואם לאו, מותרת. If the drop fell either into the liquid or into one of the pieces, we don't know which one, you stir it actively, and until it all mixes, and then it's according to Noten Tam. If it gives a taste, then it's asur, otherwise it's permitted. ואם לא נמצא עובד כוכבים שאיתו, ונסמוך עליו, משערים ב-60. If there's no trustworthy non-Jew, we calculate according to 60.
And according to the Taz, this would mean we don't need to stir it in that case.
Yeah.
So look at Zion. Look at Zion in the Rabbi Akiva Eger. It's the only Rabbi Akiva Eger here. He says, he says, I'll read it. You stir the whole pot. Yesh layen, amai shari la'asot kain. Why is this permitted? Ha'im lo yina'er, yisha'er tipa ba'oto aticha. If you don't stir it, it'll stay in that one piece. Va'al yidei hani'ur, but by stirring it, ma'il hatipa ba'aticha ha'acherot, the tipa will start spreading into the other pieces. And now you're actually doing an Isser D'Oraita of cooking milk and meat. In other words, in a case where there isn't 60, you don't know if there's 60. So maybe if there isn't 60 and you stir it, it's going to be tasting it, and it's going to be imparting flavor, and you'll actually do the Isser. Right? So he's just saying that's the point that I said that Joel thought of, that who says you can stir this, you're doing Isser D'Oraita. Now let's look at Taz 7. Taz 7 is talking about Tata Gavar. Here, maybe Josh, you read it also.
Okay. It's much shorter than Vav.
Yeah, don't worry.
ואם בשליים אחרות וכו'.
Everything
אבל-
from now on is going to be short, really.
אבל בלא בישול אינה אוסרת אפילו בשניהם חמים. If they're not cooked together, it doesn't make the others.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a
forbidden.
second. I'm sorry. We have to first finish. Sorry, we didn't get to Gimel yet. I'm in the wrong place. I didn't mark it down by me. Yeah, we're not there yet. So let's continue. Just read the last Ramah there.
Okay. ויש חולקים בספירה להוא דאינו מועיל מה שנוער הקטרה, אם לא שניער מיד שנפל האיסור, והכי נהוג.
Oh, so there he's quoting the Tur, not according to the understanding of the Taz. In other words, he's saying doesn't help if you stir it later. Well, that's the Tur says, and maybe the Taz would agree to that in certain cases, but not in the case of lo noda. In the case of lo noda, where you don't know where it fell, then he would agree. Then he would not hold like this. He would say you could stir it. Okay, Gimel. Read Gimel to us also.
ג' כשנאסרה החתיכה מחמת החלב, נעשית כל החתיכה איסור, ואם בשליים אחרות צריך 60 לבטל כולה. I think this is Hanan.
Yeah, now we're getting into Hanan, exactly. If that piece, let's say you didn't stir, you just took it out. Drop fell on the piece, it ushered the piece, you took it out. So it's and now if you took that piece that you took out of the pot and threw it into another pot by mistake, then you would need 60, not against the drop, but against that whole piece.
Right.
So the Taz is wondering, why does he say im bishla im acherot? What if it just wasn't bishel in acherot? What if it was like we learned in Siman Tzadi Aleph about Tata Gavar. That's not bishel, but it's flavor transfer. When you have a hot piece, you have a hot piece of meat, you put it on a plate of milk. That's not bishel, but there's flavor transfer. So why does he say im bishel im acherot? Then you need 60. What do you mean? In any case, you need 60. So in any kind of similar things to trade, any kind of flavor transfer. So on that, the Taz comes on Zion. So read that, Josh.
Okay. ואם בשליים אחרות. אבל בלא בישול אינה אוסרת אפילו בשניהם חמים. Even if they're both hot, even if there's heat transfer, there's no Isur transfer.
But wait a second. Aval below bishu, if you didn't cook them, eno oseret afilu b'shneim chamim. Even if they're both hot, but there's not going to be usher. Well, okay, right? There's no flavor transfer. Well, let's see. Below amrina and besim. So continue on. Just explain why.
ולא אמרו בסימן צדיק א', סעיף ד', בחם לתוכם דאוסר הכל, אלא באיסור מחמת עצמו, מה שאין כן כאן, באיסור בלוע. So what we said before in Tzadik Aleph Sif Daled, of hot into hot, which makes everything forbidden, that's only things which are forbidden in themselves, which isn't the case here, which is it's an Isur Balua.
In other words, if you have a piece of pork, and that touches a piece of meat, so then they're going to flavor transfer. But here you have meat that got absorbed with milk in it. So now it's not Isser Atzmo, so it's not going to transfer flavor in a case of like two hot pieces touching outside of a Kli Rishon. So I have a question on that. But didn't we say, and I'm sure Joel remembers this, we've said many times, that Basar B'chalav, Hanan, is called Isser Atzmo. We call that an Isser Atzmo. What does he mean there's not an Isser Atzmo? It's an Isser Atzmo.
No, that's only when the flavor has combined. It's only Isser Atzmo when the flavors have the chance.
But that's what happened here. The flavors combined. You cooked a piece of meat.
But we don't think it managed to I don't think we're saying here we don't think it managed to meaningfully combine, such as to become
no,
the proper,
it totally combined. This is Hanan. This is Hanan. It's a classic case of Hanan. You have a piece of meat that a drop of milk fell on it in a hot boiling pot. The meat absorbed that milk. The meat is aser legamre midoraita. It's basar b'chalav. It's a piece of basar b'chala. Why is that any different from a piece of pork? Okay, it's balua, but it's iser atzmo.
I'm pretty sure we say in any case when something is like asur from something that was balua and not from like its very state of being, we even, I think even with basar v'chalav, we don't consider that like mechamat atzmo. I don't think we've
Well, we
ever
do.
called it that.
Well, Joel,
We
tell us
definitely
where
have
we
it.
do. Where do we consider it iser atzmo?
I mean, the Taz says it. It's in Kuf Hey, right?
Yeah. Where is that? That's talking about haticha ruya litchabed.
Yeah.
We consider it a haticha ruya litchabed, even though if I have a piece of meat that absorbed forbidden blood, and now I wouldn't say haticha ruya litchabed because the blood is something separate.
Which has to be the case here because we've seen it over side on the tour. We see it all over the place in the Machaber, where if this is a Riyali Kabed, then the whole thing is Asur, right? All the pieces are Asur because it's not Batel. So
Right.
it must count as a
Iser atzmo.
Yeah, Isra Asmo. So
Wait, Yavni, you want to say something? You have another example?
No.
No. Okay, so I'm just bringing the kasha. I have an answer, but or put it this way: what is the case that he's
Rav
talking?
Landis,
Yeah.
The Chachmas Adam's cloud that there's no Hanan unless it's Isur Mevurar. So
This is mevurar. I know this is the piece. This is a piece of meat that definitely a drop of milk fell on it, and I took it out of this pot, and whoops, it fell into another pot. I know it fell. I know that I have a piece of isser, so that's for sure going to usser. I need 60. But if it didn't fall into another pot, it fell and it landed on top of another hot piece of kosher meat. We don't say tata gavar there, says the Taz. Why? So my question is like this. So when do we say tata gavar by milk and meat? When do we say tata gavar by milk and meat?
it's milk and meat.
Yeah, exactly. So what's that case? Give me the case.
If it's I don't know, hot cheese falling on hot.
Yeah,
meat.
exactly. Hot cheese falling on hot meat.
Oh,
Hot
I
cheese.
know.
Yeah,
Cold cheese falling on hot meat.
or cold. Either way, even
Yeah,
if they're both
it's
hot,
okay.
certainly. But yeah, cold cheese falling on hot milk. Cold cheese falling on hot meat. So there we would say tata gavar by milk and meat, but we wouldn't say if that after the hot, let's say after the cheese fell onto the hot piece of meat. Now the meat is usser. Now if another piece of meat fell onto that piece of meat, we wouldn't say tata gavar. Because even though it's still that same piece of usser meat, well, whatever. The point is, we don't say tata gavar by isser balua, and that's a total rule. In other words, that's a total rule. It's called isser balua. Tata gavar does not apply to an isser balua.
I'm wondering if part of it is because when we talk about things touching when they're hot, but they're not being cooked together, we think maybe there's like some kind of contact that's like transferred between like the mama shoots, but not of like whatever is like balua inside of them, like whatever they would be like maflit. And so here, like when I have a nevela piece of meat, everything about that meat is usser. Like anything it would be coming in contact with is like the gufa isor. Whereas you could say that like the goof of like the meat of like a basar v'chala v'chaticha is not really the main isser. The isser is like what it would expel. That would be like meat and milk juice. And so like what it's touching, like just touching the chaticha, it's not the same as touching the chaticha of nevela.
Yes, you're giving the 100%. That is 100%, I think, the correct rationale. In other words, tata gavar is already a weaker matzav, a weaker condition. And therefore, we don't say balua transfers, only the actual substance, which is more there, which is the real thing. But this is just an important addendum to Siman Tzadi Aleph, that even though we normally would think of, we have in our mind sort of that basar b'chalav is an isser atzmo, l'kol davar. And the answer is no, it's not isser atzmo l'kol davar. It's not an isser atzmo when we're talking about tata gavar.
I wonder, like with this, especially the way Lexi explained it, and also what we saw before with the Magi Mishnah's explanation about the Safek case, we're seeing the breakdown of Hanan a little bit here.
Hanan we've already talked about this many times. All the cases, you should probably write about 15 cases where Hanan doesn't apply. But yeah, but this is actually worse because this is Hanan, this we haven't seen yet. This is Hanan Deraita. In other words, the normal Hanan where we've seen leniencies is the Chumrah of the Ramah. This is not a Chumrah of the Ramah. This is a Hanan according to everybody. And even so, we don't say Tata Gavar regarding it. And it's not, it is counterintuitive because I could say, what are you talking about? The meat is usser 100%. So even if the milk doesn't go into the meat, but there's even if a second piece of meat falls on this milky piece of meat, and now another piece of meat falls on it, even if the milk doesn't go into it, but the meat went into it, and the meat is usser just as much as the milk. It's all usser. So actually, there's room to argue on this task. You see what I'm saying? In other words, it really is an Isser Atzmo. The meat is 100% usser. Anyway, but the Taz says like he says. All right, let's continue. Just wait, we didn't finish Sif Gimel, so Josh, maybe finish Sif Gimel.
Ve'im Mekira, if you know which piece of Hanan meat fell into the second part, Mashlicha, throw it away. Ba'achirot mutarot, and all the rest are permitted. Ve'im eino Mekira, harotev mutar v'kol hachatichot asurot. If you don't know which piece it is, all the pieces are forbidden, and only the liquid is permitted. If that Hanan piece of meat in the first place was Rawiya Litkabed.
And if it's not Rawiya Litkabed?
I think it's been a 10 time.
In other words, and it's also Batel, it's Batel Barov. And he right, it's Batel Barov. The piece is Batel Barov. The broth is Batel Batam. You have to go by Tam or Shishim. So this is an important thing that we've seen this a few times, but sometimes people are confused by this. You can have a mixture of pieces and broth, and you view it partani. You view the pieces against pieces, and you say it's a dry mixture. So what do you mean it's a dry mixture? It's in broth. So yes, the broth is a liquid mixture, but the pieces, even though they're in broth, you view one against the other as a dry mixture, even though it's not dry at all. But each piece vis-a-vis the other piece is dry. So then you just need simple rov. And then you'd have 60 in the whole pot and rov against the piece. Okay, so let's continue on. Dalit, maybe Lexi, you want to read?
Sure. Sorry, we're Dalit in the
Mechaber.
Mechaber. Okay. לא אמרו חתיכה עצמנית נבלה, אלא בשר בחלב, אבל לא בשאר איסורים. כגון כזית חלב שנבלה בחתיכה.
That's chelev.
Oh, yeah, important. חלב שנבלה בחתיכה, ואם בה 60 לבטלו ונאסרה, ואחר כך בשלה עם אחרות, אין צריך אלא 60 כדי כזית חלב, ואז אפילו חתיכה עצמה חוזרת להיות מותרת. Great. So the Mechaber ends up holding, we only say Hanan with basar b'chalav. Shari Sorim, we don't hold this principle, and so he's relying on, the Rabbeinu Ephraim Perush. We see the Rambam seemingly articulate it, the Ramban, the Rashba. Although the Rashba, interestingly, he does disagree. The Rashba seems to think Efshar Soch to Asor.
Yeah. So look at Yud in the Taz. Today, by the way, is going to be a share of Taz. We're mostly focusing on Taz for some reason. Look at Yud in Taz. No, I think the Taz has a lot of interesting comments.
Yeah, ואז אפילו חתיכה עצמה וכולי. נראה דכך כתב לפי מה שכתב הטור, דלא אמרינן אפשר לסוחתו אסור בשאר איסורים, ממילא אפשר לסוחתו מותר, והחתיכה עצמה מותרת, ואין לעיל, כתב להפך מזה והוא האמת. Okay.
That's very important. That last part is the most important part.
So the Taz thinks that אפשר לסוחתו is asor. Which also makes, well, it's interesting, right? Because there's all this discussion around to what extent Ashar Sochto, Asor versus Mutar and Hanan have to be aligned with one another.
Wait. Explain, before you go off, before you explain, what is it? Translate just the words of the Taz.
It seems that he said this in accordance with what the Torah wrote, that we don't say Ashar Sochto Asor, B'shar Isorim, implying that Efshar Suchto is mutar, right? Like,
Right.
there you go.
And that's
like,
the idea. Right. That's the idea of no hanan. Because there's a
well, not necessarily, right? Because the Rashba doesn't think Hanan b'shari surim necessarily, but he does think if shari sochto asur.
But it's the
yeah,
other way.
yeah. That's not the way the Torah understands it though. That's
I
what
know.
the Taz is saying.
I'm just saying like
What is there-
The Taz is saying that the Taz is saying that the Mechaber is coming in line 100% with the Torah, and not like the Rashba. And that's what he's saying. And he told me Efshar the Sochto is a sur only, not only by Basar B'chalav, but not in Shar Surim. Umemele Efshar the Sochto mutar, and therefore Efshar the Sochto mutar, and therefore this Chaticha becomes mutar. And then he says, but look in Siman Kuf Vav, Sif Aleph, which we already learned. And maybe you don't remember it, but I remember it, or at least you can remember from what he says. Shekatav lehefech mizeh. He says over there the opposite. The piece remains asur like the Rashba. So which is it? You can't paskin two sides of the same topic, two different ways. So he says, the Taz says, Vahu ha'emet. The emet is over there in Kuf.
Yeah, the thing where he said it was still asur.
Right. And this that he's writing here, he's just like sort of matik. I would say even like that. He's just copying the lashon of the Tur himself. But so here's another example of where you read the Shulchan Aruch and you paskin from the Shulchan Aruch and you get the wrong halacha. In other words, the piece is not because you didn't look at the whole Shulchan Aruch. You have to look at Kuf Vav when you look at Kuf Bet, when you look at Sadi Bet, and say, no. When he says its pieces becomes mutter, it's not true. It stays aser. So what about Shach 11? Look at Shach 11.
Do you want me to keep reading?
Yeah, Shach 11.
ואז אפילו חתיכה עצמה חוזרת להיות כותרת וכולי. תמה, ולכמן ריש סימן כ"ו כתב דחתיכה עצמה עומדת באיסורה, לפי שהאיסור שבה אינו נפלט ממנה לגמרי, עד כדי שונו. והרב בגוהות שם הבין שהם דברים סותרים זה את זה, וכדי שלא יסתרו הדברים זה את זה, כך כתב בפירוש. נראה לי שעבד מה שכתב כאן, רוצה לומר, לפי שכתב מקודם גבי בשר בחלב, דאפתא רוטב מותר בשישים, בכל מקום החתיכה באיסורה עומדת, ואם הייתה ראיה להתכבד, ואינו מכירה, אינו בטלה באלף, כמשמע לן, אין כן בשאר איסורים, אלא דבטל ברוב שאינו מכירה, כיוון דאין איסור מחמת עצמה, כלכמן ריש סימן ק"א.
You can stop there. Wait, stop there for a second.
Right, so he's like, this is actually just making this distinction.
Wait. So from the beginning, he says.
I mean, the beginning is just what the Taz was pointing out, which is that
exactly.
we see somewhere else.
And then he says, and where does the Taz? Where does the Shach start explaining? He says, "V'nira liyashev." Now here he's trying to say, well, maybe it's not a contradiction. Here is a nira liyashev. He's going to say it's not a contradiction. You think it's a contradiction? It's not a contradiction.
Right.
So what does he want to say?
Maybe this is just like highlighting a distinction between Basar V'chalav and Shari Sorim, that in Basar V'chalav, he wrote earlier that there are scenarios where if like a piece itself became Aser and you don't know which one it is, and it was like a Chaticha Re'alitz Kabed, like even if the Rotev could become permitted, none of the pieces would be permitted because it couldn't be Batel. Whereas here saying, and this is kind of the distinction we were saying about like the
why wouldn't it be Batel? Why wouldn't it be Batel?
Well, this is really if it was a Basar V'chalav thing, then if we say it, that actually becomes like Gufa Isor, not just something that, and then it was like Asor Mechamat Atzmo. Remember when we said, but with like Chaticha Re'alitz Kabed, if it's something that's just considered like
let it be Batel Barov though. So even if it's Asor B'atzmo, let it be Batel Barov.
It's a
Chaticha Re'alitz Kabed.
That's exactly right. In other words, if it's what he's saying is like this, how he's coming up with a case where the piece could become mutter, which
he's
is
like making this also. He's basically like making this a conversation about Chaticha Re'alitz Kabed almost, as in being like he's pointing out the distinction between basar b'chalav, where not only do we say chanan, but relatedly, because we say it's as if it's like asur, like mechamat atzmo, then the rule of chatichara kabed applies there. And so even if you were able to make the rotev be permitted, the pieces would all be forbidden. Whereas something like this, b'shari sorim, if it like absorbed chaylev, then that piece is not asur mechamat atzmo. And so the piece, like all the pieces, it could be like batel barov.
Right. In other words, even though it's rui litchabed, because it's.
But we don't consider it really like
we don't consider it rui litchabed, and therefore it's going to be batel. So when the Mechaber says, let's summarize that. When the Mechaber says it's ra'ui, the piece becomes mutter. He's saying, yeah, the piece becomes mutter because obviously there's other pieces in there, and therefore it's impossible rov. And it's even in a case where it's rui litchabed, it'll be batel rov. So it actually is right. The piece will become mutter, but not because it's essentially mutter. It's mutter because it's batel barov. And what's the chiddush? The chiddush is that even though it's a large piece, because if it would be a small piece, then even by basar b'chalav it would be mutter for batel barov. But even if it's a large piece, the piece becomes mutter. So that's a beautiful teretz. It's a beautiful teretz, right? I don't know how likely it is that the Mechaber really meant that, but it's certainly a very obvious teretz. Once you hear it, you say, yeah, the piece will become mutter because it's batel barov. There's other pieces there. Although he didn't, maybe there's not other pieces there, but then you just take it out. If there's not other pieces, then you take it out. So then the piece wouldn't be mutter. But okay, that's the one flaw. Maybe there aren't other pieces there. It never says that there are other pieces there. It just fell into a separate pot, right?
But it doesn't say there were no other pieces.
Yeah, it doesn't say there were no other pieces.
It tells us once it's a pot, it's the assumption is it's a meat pot.
Right.
I don't think you should, and I don't think you should be bothered with that. And the fact also that royally scabate is very subjective. It's easily pushed aside if we don't want it.
Okay, so let's continue. Right, but let's continue let's just continue in the. Lexi, you want to read a little bit? Oh,
with the
it's a long Ramah.
Yeah.
Read just a little bit.
Okay. ויש אומרים, דאמרין בכל האיסורים חתיכה נעשית נבלה, לכן המינים פשוט ואין לשנות.
Okay, so wait, yeah, so go on that. Well, that you can translate it, yeah.
I mean, fine, yeah, just that like there's an opinion that this applies everywhere, and that's what we do, and we shouldn't change that.
So look at Taz Yud Aleph. Very important Taz.
Okay, ויש אומרים דאמרין בכל האיסורים וכולי. וזהו מדרבנן, עד כאן, על כן יש לצדד להיתר במקום שהזכיר בסמוך, בשם רב, who's the Rashal again?
Yeah, it's Rashal. Somebody's called the Marshal. Sometimes called
right.
the Marshal, sometimes called the Rashal. But that's enough. What does he say there? Very important point. That
like, ultimately, this is a Durabanan concept. And therefore, like, when necessary, we can like judge lahakel in cases where that would be really significant, because even those of us who say Chanan B'Shari Surim acknowledge that this is like Durabanan. So that's very important to have that in your head, that it's only Durabanan. But is that the way it seems from the Gemara? That this is just a machloket, whether it's a Rabbanan, right? The Gemara doesn't seem to say that. So look at Rabbi Akiva Eger. Look at Rabbi Akiva Eger, number 8. Hidushei Rabbi Akiva Eger. Also a short one.
What's the Dibur Matchil? Because I don't have numbers.
D'mekom makom l'kulei alma eno ela midrabanan. So d'mekom makom l'kulei alma eno ela midrabanan. Aniyot atim medivrei tosfot ma dehakshur de Rabbi Elazar bekli midyan and yulu hayoreg. Rabbeinu Tam. There's a Rabbeinu Tam. I have a Dila Rabbi and then an Aleph. Okay, I don't know. I have a Rabbeinu Tam. Whatever. That would make more sense from a Tosfot. It's probably just a typo here.
B'kilat Midyan and Higilo Hayoreg Gedola Mavoar Despirale Dehudo Raita.
Now there was clay midyan. What's clay midyan?
There are like paradigm for doing like Hagala, things like
And
that.
what's and they probably ate nevela. The
Yeah.
pots are probably nevela. They're not milk and meat.
Oh, right. And this was his whole thing about like, and this is when he also gets into like Eno Ben Yomo versus Ben Yomo stuff and saying that like it had to have been only about Ben Yomo, that it was like commanded to do it because obviously it being commanded in the Tanakh means it's still Reita. But we say when it's Eno Ben Yomo, it wouldn't have been like Doraita a problem to use them. So it must have been like when they were Ben Yomo.
So what? So right. So what does Rabbi Akiva Eiger learn from all of this? What does he learn from all of this? From this Gemara and this Tosfot?
That he thinks there are that like Hanan can be Doraita.
The whole argument is that it's Doraita. The whole argument is it's Doraita. Those who hold Hanan B'Shari Surim hold it with Doraita. That's
right. So he's saying that like the whole concern about what will happen to the waters when you do Hagala and all these things like applies Doraita. Otherwise, Klei Midyan wouldn't be
right.
a thing.
So like usual, as usual, we have, is it Doraita? Is it the Rabbanan, Hanan? And we all sort of in our minds thought like Rabbi Akiva Eiger, because we learned this Gemaras and we saw that it's really an Ikroni Machloket. And the Taz says, no, it's the Rabbanan. So who's right? Or can we miyashiv the two? Can we miyashiv the two opinions? I think we can. Because we can say that when the Taz says it's the Rabbanan, I'm sorry, it's not really miyashiv, but I would say like this, that when the Ramah says that we hold that Shar Surim is also has Hanan, that's a minhag. Now, the halacha is not like those Gemaras that say it's the right. The halacha is clear that it's the Rabbanan, that it's nothing. And the minhag is to be, so it's a little bit, it's a little bit an argument on the Taz. The Taz is basically wrong. When he says it's the Rabbanan, I don't like to say that, but maybe we can answer that Taz really meant, not that it's the Rabbanan, but that it's a minhag. And that would be better. That would be a better thing to say. In other words, it's true that the Gemara understands the machloket is an ikroni machloket, but we'll still be makil when the Ramah says that the yesh omrim the amrinan bekol isurim chaticha naseh nevela v'ken haminhag. In other words, the yesh omrim is maybe deraita actually, and then when he says v'ken haminhag, and our minhag is to have a minhag to be like that opinion, but not actually believe that it's the right. See what I mean?
That we treat it as the Rabbanan, a heavy Rabbanan.
Yeah, that's a nice way to say it.
Which I think is a way of like relating to the language of how he like, because like again he starts it with the yesh omrim, even though this is how like that's not the strongest statement of like this is definitely definitively the like.
Well, we know it's a machloket. That's the machloket between. You can't say anything else. That's the machloket between the Ri and Rabbeinu Ephraim.
And again, but like there's different levels of like the way Rama will phrase things when it comes. And again, like the minhag pashut ve'en l'shanot is not the kind of language I feel like you use when it's like this is a doraita iser.
By the way, what does minhag pashut mean?
This is like the minhag that's spread, right? Like
that's exactly right. Many people make that mistake. They think that pashut means the simple custom. Doesn't mean the simple custom. It means the widespread custom. Like lifshot means to spread out. So, but the
Shach says it's lekulei alma Rabbanan.
What do you mean by that? Is that not what we said?
Yeah, it's not just like the Taz making a chidush there. The Shach says for the Beit Yosef and Darkei Moshe, and everyone says it's the Rabbanan.
Well, nobody says it's Doraita.
Except for Akiva Eiger.
Right. Well, I think that really what Rabbi Akiva Eiger means is that, again, that according to the Yesh Omrim, which who is that Yesh Omrim? That's in the Tosfot.
Tosfot.
And according to him, it is the right. And that's what we're just arguing on these Yesh Omrim. That's why the Divrei Amatzil is right next, the Yud Aleph in the Taz is right at the Yesh Omrim. Those Yesh Omrim, they believe it's the right. Us, how we paskin is that we don't paskin like them, but we have a minhag to follow that Chumrah. That's the way I'd understand it.
I think you're right. I think it's worthwhile reflecting that they did such a good job on creating Hanan that it's hard to take a step backwards and say, oh yeah, actually it's Drabanan. Actually it was a minhag, it was pushed out. We treat it like it's hard to step away because we're all convinced about Hanan. And they did it to us. So then they had to step back. So that's great. I like what you said.
All right, let's take a break. I'll stop the recording. Asher, you want to read in the Ramah?
Okay, where are we in the Ramah?
We're in the Ramah Daled, pretty much at the beginning of it. You can start from the beginning.
Okay.
We just read the first thing that he says,
okay.
the minhag is to follow the opinion that there is Hanan in Shar Isurim, and we debated whether that minhag is to treat it as Deraita or to treat it as Drabanan, or whether it just means we always treat it as Drabanan. Okay.
And he says, Ve'en l'shanot. Okay. ודווקא אם האיסור דבוק בחתיכת היתר, או בחתיכה כולה, חוץ לרוטב, ונפל עליה האיסור, okay. And dafka, if the isur is stuck to the chaticha of heter, or
in other words, right, we have the classic case, like fat.
Like the
fat
melted cheese. Okay, I was thinking like melted cheese. Or,
no, the classic case, think of the classic case is like chaylev, forbidden fat on a piece of meat. You cook the piece of meat with the forbidden fat on it.
Right, okay. Or
so that's when it's in the broth. Then the piece will become asur, even though it's in the broth, but there's a piece of fat stuck on it. And then he gives a second possibility.
Or shechaticha kula chutz rotev, or on the whole chaticha outside of the rotev, v'nafal alei isur, and the isur fell on it. Aval im miktzat chaticha toch harotev, ve'en right, so
that's the case of Rashi, the one Rashi talks about, where it's like slightly in the water. So here he's saying if it's a shar isur, in other words, if blood falls on a piece that's partially submerged, then lo amrinan chanan. Implication. What's the implication? What was he talking? Implication that if it would be milk and meat, and it's partially submerged, we would say Hanan.
It would be Hanan.
It would be Hanan, and that's the opinion of Rashi. So you see, we talked about this before. In the beginning of last week, we talked about this, that how does the Mechaber paskin? He paskins like Rashi, the Chumrah. In other words, he paskins like Rashi, the Chumrah, that if the piece is partially submerged and milk falls on it, that there's Hanan occurs. And now what he's telling us is that's true only by milk and meat. Another limitation on this shar isurim. When it's blood or something falling on a piece that's partially submerged, then we go like Tosfot. And we say, there's no Hanan here.
And because it's no Hanan, because there's no Hanan, then you can use the entire pot to batal the isur. But in any event, it's good to be more stringent and this or that particular chaticha. Because זה בשאר איסורים, אבל בשר וחלב, אף על פי שאין האיסור דבוק מקצת החתיכה תוך הרוטב, אמרים חתיכת נסך לילה. But that's all with the other isurim. But with b'sar v'chalav, even though the isur is not davuk, and and only a small part of the piece of heter is inside the rotev, we say then that it's chanan.
And therefore we need 60 verses
And then we need the 60 against that whole piece.
against the whole
No,
piece.
yeah,
Against the whole piece, even though it's submerged, like Rashi held.
right.
So here's clear, by the way, from what we didn't know, maybe we're sure about in Sif Aleph. Now it's very clear that he's holding the Chumer like Rashi. In Basar B'Chalav, but not in Shari Surim. In other words, here's another place where we're going to be lenient in Shari Surim. Okay, go on.
יש אומרים דולו, אמרינן חתיכה נסד נבלה, אם נתערב איסור לך בהיתר לך. There are those who say that we don't call it chanan if we're talking about an isur, a lach, a sort of a liquidy isur that fell into a liquidy heter. And then all of it sort of mixes in with the heter.
In other words, you have like,
sorry. And then all mixes in with another.
What's the case? So what's the case? Give me a graphic case.
Is you have some. I'm assuming that all of this we're talking about means sheino b'mino, right?
Yeah, you can assume it's min meino.
Okay, so you have some.
I would say afilu min meino.
Okay, so I would say the case is an isur lach, let's say blood, falls into your nice kosher bloodless soup, and then.
And then the whole pot falls into.
And then the whole pot gets mixed in with another heter soup.
Exactly. So okay, do you need against the blood or against the blood and first kosher soup mixture?
Right.
Ein sarich rak shishim neged ha'isur shenafal. So that's what this opinion says. And then he goes on. V'yesh. In other words, you only need against the original blood.
Okay.
But then he read on, it's very important.
So you can use this when you're talking about the other isurim in the case of a great financial loss, but not with basar v'chalav.
So in other words, the opinion is, if we talked about the opinion in its purity, the opinion is that by liquids, we never say chanan. And the application, says the Ramah, is only by Shari Surim and only in a Hefsed Meruba. So pretty much most of the time, I mean, most of these cases you could say are going to be Hefsed Meruba, but let's say in many of the cases, this rule will not be followed. We will not have this leniency. But if we have these two conditions, that it's Shari Surim and it's Hefsed Meruba, these are the kind of little details that actually are worth noting, much more than whether how you eat a kachal, how you can eat udders, and a lot of other and visual salty things cooking. These are actually crucial halachas to retain.
Sorry, wouldn't it be like three conditions? So lach b'lach, hefsed meruba, and shari surim?
Exactly. If you write it down, yes, that would be the three conditions.
It also seems interesting. I'm thinking about now this whole thing with hesed meruba is a very how can I say it's very relative. Somebody, for example, a very poor family, Hefsed Meruba will be something much less than a very wealthy family.
Sure. I forget where, but one of the Nosei Kalim here even says it's everything according to the ayin of the judge, according to the opinion of the rabbi at the time. It's a very flexible thing. Let's look at Shach Yudal.
Okay.
Actually looking at a Shach.
Okay, יש אומרים דלא אומרים על חנן אם נתערב איסור לך וכולי, כלומר, זה דווקא שנתערב איסור.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I have to find it. I told you to go there, but I didn't actually find it. Okay, there it goes. Now go ahead.
Okay. כלומר, זה דווקא שנתערב איסור לך והיתר יבש אמרים על חנן.
Oh, so he asked the question, so when do we say Hanan?
So you say Hanan when it's a wet isur going into a dry heter.
So this is, so Isaac, are you there?
Like my blood fell onto my chicken breast.
I am. What's up?
So you were writing it. I was writing you, and I wanted you to look into this question because you see here that there's lach b'lach and there's yavish b'yavish, and then there's min b'mino eno mino. That gives you 4 possible combinations. But here you have a new category, lach b'yavish, and that's actually the main time we talk about. That's for sure chana. In other words, lach b'yavish. That's like a drop of milk falling on a piece of meat. That's lach b'yavish. I'm just saying it's like a third parameter that we didn't, not a third parameter, but a third case. We didn't talk, we usually talk about lach b'lach and yavish b'yavish, but here we have lach b'yavish mentioned explicitly. So, and that's dafka where we have, klomar, the dafka kishenitarev iser lach beheter yavish, amrina hatikad nase nevela mitam. Why is that? So now we have to get the rationale. Why is it that we say it there, but we don't say it in lach b'lach? In other words, what's the reason for the heter lach b'lach? We could think of all kinds of reasons. I would say because, it fully mixes again in the second mixture. Like the blood will spread around; it won't stay localized. But that's not what he says. He says hashivut ha'raticha isur, because of the significance of the piece that became aser. Nikar, it becomes, or the chashivut is nikar. Actually, it should be, or the piece, I don't know. Muvdalhu, no, the piece. The piece is muvdal and nikar v'nase nevela. And that's why it becomes an avela, because it's a clear, distinct, important entity. Avalo k'shenitarev iser lach beheter lach, kagon yayin nesech liyayin kasher, like mixing of kosher and non-kosher wine.
So he gives us a definition of chashivas we may not have thought about before. We talk about chashivas in terms of being worthwhile. Here, chashivas is, as you just said, a definable entity. It's a chashiv.
Right.
Lach flows through your fingers, so it's not chashiv. The bulka, the piece, is chashiv, but not chashiv because it's worth a lot of money. It's not chashiv because people like to eat it. It's chashiv because it's a thing. It's a zach.
Because it's right. Because the final. In other words, you're distinguishing this from haticha ruya litchabed. That's
Right.
also chashuv, but that's a different kind
Then
of.
we use chashivas in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Ve'ein chiluk bein im haheter ha'acher lach or yavesh. And now he says another point we didn't think about, because Asher, in your example, you said it was like falling into another pot of soup. He says it could even fall into dry things. Doesn't matter if the other one is dry. Fine. But that's all in this opinion. That's just the really the Shach giving a rationale for the opinion of why lach b'lach should be more lenient across the board. Obviously we're only applying that in Shar Yisurim Hefsed Merubah. But he's giving the essential reason. All right, let's go on. I'm sort of skipping. I'm skipping something here, which is the Pri Megadim in the end of Taz 15, which talks about what if you cook lach b'lach? So the Pri Megadim says, his example was like wine and wine, right? Things that you're not going to really cook. It just makes, what if you cooked it? Maybe it becomes, so by the rationale, so the Pri Megadim says, well, by the rationale that the Shach says, doesn't matter. But the Taz says at the end of 15, no, if you cook it, this is only talking where it's cold. If you cook it, then there's always going to be chana. Okay, but let's go on. So Asher, read a little more in the Ramah.
If you have dry with dry, no matter what, you never call it chanan with yavesh v'yavesh.
And again, you could ask the question, what if you cook it?
Okay.
In other words,
ועין העיל בסימן צדיק ט' מדין חתיכת נעשה נבלה, כלי הנאסר מבליעת איסור לא אמרינן בחתיכת נעשה נבלה, ולא בעינן 60 רק נגד האיסור שבלה.
Okay, so first of all, two things. Yeah, so we saw, now we just learned that yavish b'yavish, we never say, even whether it's milk and meat or whether it's shar surim, we don't say chanan. And then he says, what about the kli that's nasar? What's the kli? Kli nasar mebliat iser. What would it be a case where what would it mean? What would it mean to say that we would have chanan there? What would that mean? Asher.
I'm figuring it out. I understood the question was to me, but I'm not finding it. My brain is not. Okay. לא אמרינן בחנן ולא בעינן 60 רק נגד האיסור שבלה.
In other words, you had a pot.
You're only going to only the Isur that was sort of absorbed per se into the Kedera.
Right. In other words, you have, let's say, a pot, and now the whole pot became treif because some blood spilt on it. You're boiling a small amount of water, and some blood spilled into it. It wasn't batal b'shishim. Now the whole pot is usher. Do I need the original milk, the original blood that fell in was only a few grams. Do I need to have bittul against the whole metal of the pot, which is more than a few grams? Because the whole pot is usher now. I have to do hagala on the pot. What if I don't do hagala on the pot and I cook something in it? How much will that thing be automatically treif because the whole pot became usher? Do I say chanan? Do I need 60 against the whole pot, or do I need 60 just against the original blood? So look at, so he says you don't say chanan.
Right, you just say against the original blood.
Just need against the original blood. So another case where we don't say chanan.
Well, we kind of do.
What?
We kind of do. I mean, the gra is helpful there.
Well, that's what I wanted to say. Look at the gra that's exactly where I want to go. Gra 25. So maybe somebody who did, maybe Yavni, you'll read.
Sure, hang on, I'm just getting to it. 25, you said, right?
Yeah.
כלי וכולי, רוצה לומר שצריך 60 נגד הכלי עצמה, שיחשב הקדרה עצמה כאילו היא אסורה, והיינו בחדשה, וכמו שכתוב בסימן צדיק ח' סעיף ה', אם ידוע וכולי. ולא אמרינן גבי כולי, וראיה ממה שכתב קדרה שבישל בתחומה כולי, בנותן טעם. אבל בישנה אמרינן לגבי בלוח חנן, כמו שכתוב שם בסימן, ובסימן זה בסעיף ה'.
Okay, wait, stop. So, okay, translate or summarize, explain.
Talking about the issue of like, if you're counting the pot as if you're counting the pot as a chanan, this is because you're really talking about what has been balua in the past in the pot, and therefore there are all these other cases where if you like, there's a lot of v'chules here, but the primary case is if it's new, then there's nothing balua in it, and then presumably there are other cases about what you know about what's balua in it from earlier. Is that a fair summary?
Well, he's limiting, he's limiting, right? He's limiting the statement that we don't say Hanan in a pot. He's saying basically we do say Hanan in a pot. And
Right.
He's limiting the times that we don't say Hanan in a pot to which case?
When it's new,
Yeah, when it's new. When it's new. But in a
because
case,
it's not really the pot that we're saying Hanan about. It's about the lachluchit or whatever the
Exactly.
stuff
In other
that's
words,
already in it.
we don't say about the pot itself, Hanan, but the balua, says the Gra, we do say.
Right.
And in fact, if I'm dropping blood, if you think about this case, it's kind of weird what he's talking about, because if I'm cooking pea soup, let's say, and I drop some blood into it, so now I have Hanan. But there's obviously balua in the walls of the pot because I'm cooking pea soup in it. How could it be a new case? A new case would only be that I had a hot pot on the fire and I dropped some blood in it by mistake, and there was nothing in the pot. Brand new, a new pot. By the way, new also means Eino ben Yomo. Well, that's a question, but probably. Probably means also Eino ben Yomo. So Eino ben Yomo or new pot. You drop blood directly on it. So that's the only case where we don't say Hanan. But if you're cooking something, immediately as the moment you're cooking it, you're getting balua.
Oh.
Okay. Here, Yavni, why don't you read Sifhei?
In Shulchan Aruch, right?
Yeah.
טיפת חלב שנפלה על הקדרה, שאצל האש מבחוץ, אם נפלה כנגד התבשיל, שאצל האש מבחוץ, נפלה כנגד התבשיל, אין צריך אלא 60 כנגד הטיפה שמפעפעת לפנים, והווה כאילו נפלה בתבשיל. ואם נפלה במקום הריקן, והיא מפעפעת בדופן הקדרה, עד סמוך לרוטב כל כך שאין 60 כנגד הטיפה, הרי נאסר אותו מקום הקדרה ואם ירה התבשיל דרך מקום הקדרה, אם ירה התבשיל דרך המקום הקדרה שנאסר, הרי יאסר התבשיל. וזה תקנתו שיניחנה כך ולא ייגע בה עד שתצטנן. So that actually answers your question about the old or the new pot, because if you're only worried about the part of the pot where the thing you're cooking in now isn't, then you're worried about the thing that's balua in that part of the pot, which means like maybe in the past you had a fuller soup pot and that's how it got balua there, but that part of the pot doesn't have your soup in it.
Well, then you're saying you're assuming
Maybe.
that you cooked the previous soup more than a day ago. It's also not so clear because we're actually worried. It's not so clear what you're saying.
Sure.
We're actually, what is the concern here? Why here? I'll say it differently. I'll say it like this. The top part of the pot, let's review what the halacha was. The halacha is that if a piece, this is by the way very strict halacha, and I find it difficult to accept, but it's a very strict halacha. It's saying that a drop of meat, you're boiling up your milk soup, or meat soup, and a drop of milk hits the outside of the pot at below the level of the soup, then we say it's batal b'shishim if there is shishim, assuming there's shishim.
Right.
But if it hits above the level of the soup, then what we say is it spreads out in the wall up to 59 times the spot, or 60 times the spot, up to exactly 59 times the spot, not more. We're worried that maybe it spreads around and it keeps spreading until it gets just to the point where it's not batel, but it users, and we're saying Hanan. So now you're asking, well, doesn't that mean that we do say Hanan in a pot that has, let's say, old balua? To that I say no, it is new balua, because we're worried that the pot, when you're boiling it goes up and down, and you stir it and it splashes, and there's fresh balua everywhere in the pot. That's what's going on here. There's fresh balua everywhere in the walls of the pot, and the drop is hitting above the line, and on that balua it is making Hanan. So actually, it proves the gra. I mean, it proves that when the Ramah says we don't say Hanan, well, the next Sif says we do say Hanan. So it's talking about the Balua though. So it proves that the gra is right. But anyway, that's the worry. So what's the solution? Let it cool down, and then pour it out. Why can't you just pour it out on the other side? Just pour it out on the other side where the drop wasn't.
It seems like you could in theory.
You could in theory, but so one of the commentators says,
Maybe you're
because
worried
when,
that it's spread all the way.
yeah, when you pick it up to pour it, it's going to splash a little bit and go and touch that area. So you can't even pour it out. You've got to let it cool, one measly drop. But if it hit above the line, you got to let the whole thing cool and then pour it out. And then you're going to do hagala on the pot. All because of this measly drop, which is, well, either milk or meat or shari surim, right? This is talking about milk and meat. What does the Mechaber say? Does the Ramah say anything? Yeah, read them. The Ramah actually a little bit contradicts what I said.
ודווקא אם הקדרה ישנה,
Yeshana.
ישנה, thank you. אבל אם היא חדשה בכל עניין, אין צריך 60 רק נגד הטיפה שנפל עליה, כדלקמן סימן צדיק ח' גבי
Right,
כ'.
so he sort of contradicts me. He says, no, if it's new, then there's no balua there, and then you wouldn't need 60 if it hit above. But
it helps. Right, but if we say that it's not, that it's new and you're just cooking the soup in and out, that helps with your question about like, well, what about the soup you're cooking in and now? Because we're only talking about the region of the pot where that soup isn't cooking. So it makes sense that there would be no balua there from the current soup.
Yeah, except my point about it going up and down, about the broth going up and down. So look at Kaf Gimel.
Right.
Look at Kaf Gimel in the Shach.
Okay. Would you like me to read it?
Taz Yud Tef.
What?
Taz Yud Tef. Oh, it's long. Don't have time for Taz Yud Tef. But he just asked the question, what if you have 60 times 60? What if the drop is so small that even if it's spread out 60 times its size, but the broth, the soup, but even if I pour it over that area, the soup will be 60 times the drop. Then it should be mutter to pour.
I thought they didn't say that about the pouring because the pouring was in it, but like, yeah.
You shouldn't ask for the pot. I don't know. All right, but let's skip that. Do the shach that I said. Kaf Gimel.
זה לא כמה סימן צריך גבי כף, ואף על גב לכאורה לא דמי לכף, דהתם כיוון שהיא חדשה וניער אחר כך בקדרה, אין צריך 60 אלא כנגד מה שבלעה. אפילו הקדרה חשיבה כמו ישנה, sorry?
Here's what he's going to say what I said.
שהרי מבשלים בה עתה בשר ונפל עליה טיפת חלב בשעת בישול. מכל מקום, כיוון שעתה בא לאסור דופן הקדרה מחמת הטיפה, על כן צריך לומר שמא בישול אינו מפעפע בכל הכלי, ואם כן לא פעפה נמי בתבשיל למעלה, ואם פעפה למעלה, אם כן גם הטיפה מתפשטת עד מטה. או יש לומר דמיירי בקדרה חדשה שנפל עליה הטיפה, כשעדיין לא חם התבשיל, אינמי אחר שנפלה הטיפה על הקדרה של אחר שנפלת הטיפה על הקדרה של מים, נתנו בו הבשר וקיים עליו.
Well, all right, so go back and translate this. Or translate and explain.
Okay, so I didn't follow it all, but So it would seem like it's not actually similar to it's not actually the same as the case of the spoon.
The spoon, we do
Because
say
in the case of
chanan.
the spoon, it's really new, and only then you're mixing it in the pot, and then you don't need and then like whatever it's absorbing, like it has nothing pre-absorbed into it, so whatever it's absorbing, you just need 60 against that it's already in the pot. But here with the kedera, like you said, it should be thought of as something old because it's currently cooking soup in it, so it should have already absorbed into the walls. And then it's cooking meat, and then a drop of milk falls onto it from the outside while it's cooking.
Now he says, but nevertheless.
Yeah,
Nevertheless.
because yeah.
It's al karcha. Al
Al
karcha. You are
karcha.
forced. So nevertheless, since you are coming to us to forbid the wall of the pot,
right?
Because of that tipa, you must say Shema bishul eino mifapeya. In other words, you must say maybe the reason that it's aser is because maybe the bishul doesn't come up. Because if it comes up, then it's like there's no difference between it hitting above the line of the broth or below the line of the broth if it comes up. Maybe or Shema bishul eino. So maybe the bishul doesn't mifapeya b'kol hakli. Maybe the bishul doesn't go everywhere. And if that's the case,
then
if that's the reason why you're ushering, then you must also think that the top shield never came up. In which case, it is like a kli chadash.
Right.
So then the food also doesn't go up. So there's no balua in the pot above the line. But if it does go up, if you're going to tell me that it does go up, then I'll tell you that the drop goes down, that the drop spreads everywhere. So you can't have it both ways, is what he's saying. And therefore, if it's a new pot, he's not going to say this din of the walls becoming usher. And a new pot could be also an old pot that just has been sitting for 24 hours. Or perhaps we're dealing with a pot that was not yet hot. All right, that's a different explanation.
I think the pot's hot, but the contents are not hot yet. Is his point there?
Yeah, the pot's hot, but right, exactly. The contents are not hot. That's another explanation. But what's the point? What's the upshot of this? I guess he's just explaining that that really it is true that a new pot will not have chanan in it. Against what I said. So where did I see what I said? I guess it was in the Taz, but fine.
I mean, he says it and then he finds a solution.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your vote of confidence. All right. Let's go on. See if Zion. We finished it. See Vav.
No.
Oh, I see. The Gra. I think it's the Gra 29. I'm just checking. I think it's the Gra 29. But let's go on. See Vav. Yes. Somebody else wants to read who didn't read. Or Yavni wants to read more.
I can keep going.
Yeah, so keep going.
נהגו העולם לאסור כשנפלה על הדופן שלא כנגד הרוטב, ודווקא כשנופל באותו צד שאינו כנגד האש, אבל אם נפל כנגד האש, מותר שהאש שורפו ומייבשו, So it's a
So wait,
repeat
wait.
of what we
He
said.
just, so what's the difference? Wait a second. What did we just say in Heg? That if it falls above the line, what's the din?
It's if it's an as long if it's an old pot, then it's a problem.
Right. Then what do you mean it's a problem? What do you do?
And you wait until it cools down.
Okay. But you're right, it's usser, and it causes a problem, and you have to wait. So what's the chiddush of Vav? Nagu, it starts with the word Nagu. The Hey was just telling us a halacha. So what's Vav telling us?
That we're even more machmir, that we're
Yeah, we're even more machmir. What? How more machmir?
that we don't that like it's a stool immediately and we don't wait and we don't just wait to pour it out.
Yeah. What's a sur?
The
The whole thing. All
whole
the food.
thing.
The whole
Mhm.
thing. Now he's
Oh.
telling us we don't. Everything I just told you in Hay, we don't actually do that. We don't actually just wait for it to get cold and then pour it out. The whole thing is usher. That's super strict. In other words, a drop.
I feel like you don't have to read it that way. You could read it in conversation with it saying that, like, if it falls connected to ish, like sorfo, and it's like mutar mamash, like you don't even need a shear. And you could read a store here as being like, you need a shear if it isn't for this scenario. But if it's a small tipa that falls connected to ish,
I hear what
then
you're saying.
it just gets burnt up and it's fine.
You're right. You could try to read it that way. I don't think that's right though. But Nagu olam le'asor.
But just if it burns, it's gone. If it's issue of beetle, then you need a shear because it's not gone, unless you say beetle. But but burning is a total eradication.
You look at Shach 24. Lexi, read Shach 24.
נגוע עולם וכולי, מהרי זה היה אחרון וגדול בדורו, וזה מחקר כל המנהגים, כתב נוהגים להתיר על ידי צינון, כמו שכתוב בספר.
So stop there. So he says, so the Shach comes along and says, the Mahari was the greatest, was the most recent Gadol, and he investigated this issue and asked everybody what the minhag is all over the world, and everybody answered him that the minhag is like Sivhei. Implication, I think, that in other words, what the Mechaber is saying is not like Sivhei. In other words, he's saying we're super strict, and the Shach comes and says, no, don't worry, we're not super strict. I'm just pointing out that as far as reading it, I think the Machaber is coming to say be strict. Yes, the Shach says don't be strict. So wait, go back, Yavni, read again. Read from the Vav again.
נהגו העולם לאסור כשנפלה על הדופן שלא כנגד הרוטב, ודווקא כשנופל באותו צד שאינו כנגד האש.
So in the minhag, there's a kula that if it fell somehow near the fire, the drop, then it got burnt up.
Right.
Avalim nafal.
אבל אם נפל כנגד האש, מותר שהאש שורפו מייבשו, like you said.
Right.
Makes it disappear. The Rama says, ואז הקדרה נמי שרי. And that way, even the pot itself doesn't have a problem going forward.
Implication up till now, for sure, when we said it was usher, it wasn't just the pot that was usher, but even the contents were usher.
Right.
Right? Because now the Rama is saying, oh, and the pot would be mutter. Whereas before, the pot would have been usher, but also the contents would have been usher.
Right. Vidavka, and in the places where we said it was, you could find the stuff mutar, the pot might still be usher. Vidavka b'davar mu'at כגון טיפה, אבל אם נפל הרבה, אין להתיר אפילו אם נפל כנגד האש, אלא אם כן כנגד הרוטב ועל ידי שישים.
Right, which is the other avenue of heter. If it falls below the line, then we say basically why is we didn't discuss this, but why is it mutter when it falls below the line?
Because it's batel in the shishim of the contents of the pot. Because
right, but why don't we, right? In other words, we say it goes through. You kind of say it goes through the pot, and and we say like this. If it doesn't, you say like this. We say oh manavshach actually. And manavshach is always where you say there's two ways to look at it. Either way, it'll be mutter. One way of looking at it is that it goes through, in which case it's batal b'shishi. And the other way of looking at it doesn't go through. Well, if it doesn't go through, then also it's mutter because it didn't go through. But you can't say that on manavshach by the top, right? Because the top it could be that it didn't go through. It can't go through really because you can't say it goes through because where did it go through to? There's nothing up there.
I didn't realize until now that this somewhat has a parallel to the Rashi solution that the whole thing of the drop falling on a piece of meat is when it's partially chutz l'rotev. And this is a similar idea to it of like the part of the pot that's above is also like on itself can become asur. So
that's very interesting. You're saying that's it's sort of directly derives from that case. Interesting. I mean, there are other Gemaras. I think there are other Gemaras that this is not. I didn't give you the Gemaras to look at, but there are Gemaras that this is from. Separate Gemaras. Let's look at the Gra 29. Gra 29. Nagua Olam. So we just said Nagua Olam to answer it. We saw that the Shach says, well, actually, the Mahari says we're Mekel, we're not like the Mechaber says, even though the Ramah doesn't argue on it, but he says we don't. Now, what does the Gra say? So here, Joel, you read the Gra.
all right, I got to figure out what all these Rashi whatever. The
I'll help you.
The Chashinan. Yeah, that I got. The Chashinan. Shema Allah Charkach, is it Pamachat?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Pamachat Retich. Retichat Ketera. Leoto Miksata Ketera Shenesra.
Right, stop there. So that's what I was saying. That's where I got. I know I saw it somewhere. That's where I was saying this. Why are we machmir? Because we're worried. Go ahead.
We treat every pot like it's old because we assume that maybe while you're cooking, some of it splashed around to the top of the pot.
That's actually what I was thinking when I first read it. But now that you read it, and that's where I got it from. But now that you read it, I don't think that's actually what he's saying. He's saying because remember what's a divra matkil? He's explaining why we're machmir to us or the whole pot.
Yeah, and it's because we treat every pot as if it's as if it's old.
But it says acharkach, right? So it's like.
No, exactly. He's saying more. Exactly. In other words, why are we usering the content? Because letting it sit and get cold. He's explaining why letting it sit and get cold doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Yeah.
It doesn't work because you turn off the flame, but it's still boiling and it may be a little bit splattered up. And maybe there's an earthquake, I don't know, whatever. The things jiggle. Maybe it's on one of those old-fashioned. Maybe it's in a fire with a tripod and it's hanging from a hook like a witch cooks, and maybe it jiggles. I don't know, but he's saying Shema Allah acharkach pam achat, just once. The retichat hakadera lo tom miksas hakadera v'nesra. He's not actually saying what I just learned that from this. I learned that idea from this chapter, But really, what the Gra is saying is that's the source to be machmir.
Yeah. Keep going.
It's also on a different question because this is still on the old pot as opposed to on right. You were raising the issue.
He's going to say it is v'hainu b'kterei yeshana uben yomo, right? So
okay.
Yeah. Ve'im b'tavshil shishim pa'amim shishim neged hatipa. Shachu pashut kinireli v'chein imeno ben yomo k'mo shekatav Siman sadi daled sif daled. So yeah.
V'dafka. Here's a big kula.
Here we go. V'dafka shektera megula. Aval mechusa kol ktera ke'ilu neged harotev k'mo shekatav la'el probably sif bet. That's only for an uncovered pot. This even more so makes it right. Ni'er mitchila sof, or you covered it right. That it doesn't matter if the thing's in the rotev, out of the rotev. Same thing here. A covered pot. I mean,
What we learned from this, Lamaisa, always cook with a lid on your pot. You will not have problems.
I mean, I assume it would be the same thing too if you're uncovering and covering, but you like the drop falls and you immediately cover it, right? Would be the same dean.
Maybe, yeah, maybe, right. But the point is, if you have, let's just spell out what we just read. What the Gra is saying, amazing point, important and logical, very logical point. He's saying, if the pot is covered, then it falls above, then whether we hold like this minhag of saying that all the contents are usher or not, actually here, we're going to say it's mutter. I mean, assuming there's 60 against the drop. So as long as you have a decent sized pot, a drop of milk falls on the outside. If it's covered, it's as though it fell against the rotev, and if there's 60, the whole thing is mutter. You may still need to do hagala on the pot.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, he
Why
says,
would you
right.
need to do? Yeah.
Well, he keeps going. He says, "Ve'im kol zeh katav shach u'pri chadash b'shem ha'achronim lehatir al yedei tzinun kemo shekatav b'seif shekadam." Right. So at the very minimum, right, with all these little things he's added, he's like, you can wait till it cools down and pour it out that
In other words,
way.
have a lid and also wait
Mhm.
with the lid on. No, but what about hagala on the pot?
Well, that would sound
Pot,
like you have to do hagal on the pot still, right?
it seems to be, yeah, exactly. If you're going to say this, then you for sure have to do hagala on the pot. If you're going to say that you could still create problems if you don't let it cool off, then yeah, you have. Anyway, it's logically you have to do hagala because remember I said it's a maman of shach. Either it's two ways of looking at it. Either the drop goes through or it doesn't go through. If it doesn't go through, then it's on the outside. Then you've got treif on the outside of your pot. You know, there's a little bit of milk and a little bit of meat in the walls of the pot. Even if it didn't go through all the way to the inside, it's in the walls of the pot. It might come out next time. So you have to do hagala. And by the way, the commentators say you have to. When I say commentators, I mean I don't remember who says, but the commentators say that you have to do hagala not just by filling it with water and letting it overflow. That would work in a normal case. But since this was a drop on the outside, you have to do hagala where you put it into a bigger pot. Because there's on the outside wall. Treif. Joel, you don't like that?
No, I'm thinking about that lechumra in terms of Pesach, right? When you're doing hagala for Pesach, well, maybe some chametz came from the outside. Probably for sure it did at some point. And
that's an interesting question. Yeah. Well, I don't have that problem. I have separate pots for Pesach. But yes, probably for Pesach you should. That's interesting. I never heard anybody say that though, that you have to do that for Pesach Kashri. Maybe we're not chosh, ein machzikim isura.
yeah.
If we don't know it happened, we don't just say, well, probably it happened. I would say that's the answer. So we don't have to do that for Pesach. So we're pretty much out of time here. We didn't get to 7. That's okay. There is well, let's just read 7. He says, I'll just read it. He says, Yesh misha matir b'shasat chak kegon be'erev Shabbos, afilu shelo keneged harotev, afilu shelo keneged ha'esh al yidei shishi. So as long as it's 60, you could actually be mekel, even if it's above the line. If it's erev Shabbos, you know, I have said meruba, b'shasat chak kegon erev Shabbos, or whatever, shasat chak. You can't make up more food later. You can't get more food. Your food is going to be ruined now. So then you can be even lenient here. So it's interesting, by the way, that you see that the Mechaber himself is like, you don't usually see this kind of language in the Mechaber, where he's telling you, well, in these it can be even lenient in such a case. So that's interesting.
Well, it is a handbook. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a handbook, but you don't usually
What do you
see.
do? You know, you look in your glove compartment, and what do you do when the tire goes out? You know, you still have a mile to get home. So it tells you what to do.
Yeah, it tells you what to do. But it's sort of funny. In Sif Hay, he said that we can be lenient, you know, except you let it cool off. And then in Sif Vav, he says, actually, that's not good enough. It's going to all be usher. And now he says, well, actually, it can all be mutter. In other words, it's going back and forth, depending on, so it's clearly a din that's like, you know, has a lot of reasons to go in 2 different directions. The other thing that we could just quickly in our last minute here is Taz 30. He says, where is Taz 30? That's forward. No, where is that? Well, it's very long. But in Taz 30, I won't read it to you, but in Taz 30, he says, there's a line there, it says, basically, he says that a ladle, he says, what's a ladle? Can you do Hagala by like picking up, dipping a pot into a pot of boiling water and then pouring the boiling water onto whatever you want to kasha? Is pouring, is the, or in the ladle, I don't know. You dip a pot into it. That's a better example. You dip a pot into a pot of boiling water. Now you have a pot of boiling water, but it's klisheni. And now you want to put spoons and forks into that smaller pot. So the Taz says that the Maharal the Maharil, I think, considers a second vessel to be, considers the ladle to be a second vessel and therefore it doesn't work. And the Taz brings 8 reasons why a ladle is a kli rishon. And that's interesting. He brings 8 reasons here. If you want to look at this Taz, I counted them out. Why a ladle actually is a kli rishon. Obviously, we talk about that on Shabbos. It could be a kli rishon because you stick it in the pot. It's in the pot. You drop it in the pot while the pot's on the fire. Maybe it's kli rishon. That would be a chumrah for Shabbos, but it would be a kula here in the sense that you could take the ladle out and then drop things into the ladle to do hagala.
If it's metal, it's very hot. They didn't have fancy stuff, they didn't have fancy kalim. It's a piece of metal. It's extraordinarily hot.
Yeah. So I think the answer is it depends on exactly how you use it. If you're really leaving it in the pot and taking it out, then it's a kli rishon. But if you, are just quickly, serving lots of bowls of soup, then you could count it as a kli sheni. We're not learning Hilchos Shabbos, but we did learn Hilchos Shabbos a few years ago, and this came up then. And we said that mostly it is considered a kli sheni. Because usually you do it fast. But again, it depends what you're doing. If you leave the ladle in the pot. Anyway, I just thought it's an interesting, if you ever learn the sugya of a ladle on Shabbos, come to this Taz Lamed. Okay, we'll end there. We saw a lot of interesting things. We learned about Hanan in Shari Surim. We learned about, that whole submerged thing. We learned Lach Belach, when we can be lenient, right? We could say Behefsid Meruba, we don't have to hold in Shari Surim, there's no such thing as Hanan and Lach Belach. We talked about dry and dry, never has Hanan. We learned a lot of very important foundational ideas in this Siman, which is also like kind of review of what we've done all year. But some ideas were new. Okay, next week is Rabbi Landis. We're going to do 2 Simanim next week, but they're very short. Thank you, guys.
Shkayach.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Yeshua.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.